of all, we make fun of their accents. And we make fun of the stereotypes that they provide. So another stereotype of Indian parents is that they're kind of concerned about your academics when you're growing up, right? Just a little concerned about your academics, just a little bit. So I would always remember, I did pretty well in school. I think Madhu did as well. We would come home and we'd have to show them our tests. It wasn't like something like we'd look up on MyStar and say, oh, how they doing? We actually had to show them what your test score was. And I'd come home and I'd be so proud on my math test. I'd be like, look, Dad, I got a 98%. Look at this. This is great. It's an A. What happened to that other 2%? You didn't study enough?
Oh my God, that's so my dad.
I didn't come all this way from New York, from Bombay to come and have you get 98s. I want 100. If you don't get 100, you'll be back in the gutter, just like we were. Seriously, that was kind of the discourse. In fact, so I'm trying to carve my way as the white cream in the middle of the Oreo cookie, trying to, sort of become part of the American culture. So what do? In high school, I learned I'm like, all right, I'm not very good at sports. My three-point shot is terrible, my free throw is terrible. But I actually find, and I'm not a good soccer player, but I actually find that I can handle a stick and I can play lacrosse. So I asked I got turned on to this in 8th grade, and I asked my parents to buy me a lacrosse stick, and I actually got pretty good, and I made the freshman team at Catholic Central, and did pretty well. I wasn't the best player on the team, but I was in the middle, so I made the JV team in sophomore year. And this looked like I was thinking, I'm making it. I'm actually part of the American culture. I'm playing lacrosse, I'm at a Catholic school, got a bunch of white friends, make fun of Indian people.
You have a Chevrolet?
Didn't have a Chevrolet yet, but I'm like, heading to an escort. I'm making it. I'm living my parents' dream for me. And then, the winter term of my sophomore year, I bring home my report card. And there is that letter in one of my grades, which is the letter you cannot get if you are a child of an immigrant parent. That is a B+.
That's right.
And it wasn't a B+ in health. It wasn't a B+ in shop. It was a B+ in biology.
Oh. You were
Now,
screwed.
now B is for biology, but you cannot get no B+ in biology. So I literally had to quit lacrosse because of the B+ in biology.
Wow.
So if you think the stereotypes are kind of there. I'm not an advocate for racism or stereotyping, but stereotypes are there a little bit for a reason. There's kind of a reason. There's a little bit of truth behind it. So I think my entire career for a professional lacrosse player was subverted by this B+ in biology. Imagine how successful I would have been. NCAA, probably playing at Michigan State or Hopkins.
Yeah.
Dribbling the ball. But instead subverted by academically focused Indian
We're
parents.
slumming at Harvard.
Yeah.
Yeah, slumming it.
That was the last B+ I ever got. So maybe it did serve its purpose. The other thing that living in a household of Indian parents, you get to kind of not only just make fun of them and imitate them, but you actually get to sort of hear them try to assimilate in the American culture. And what I realized is that while I get permission to be racist, they're actually accidentally racist. I don't think they're racist people, but they don't sort of understand what the norms are of American culture and how you don't necessarily express every thought that comes into your head, right? We all sort of have filters, right? Most of us learn filters.
Including about race.
Sometimes about race, we've sort of decided, we kind of get acculturated as to what are you allowed to say and what are you not allowed to say. A lot of the stuff I'm saying here, I shouldn't be saying. So there's this So I think my dad especially is an accidental racist. Have you guys ever seen The Accidental Tourist? Yeah, I think he's the accidental racist. So there's one example of that was, they love to spend time with their grandchildren. And so the best thing about we've been able to do is when we had to go see our grandparents or even talk to our grandparents. How many of you have your grandparents that lived within 100 miles of where you lived? Yeah, a lot of you did, right? How many of you within 1,000 miles? Okay? Our grandparents lived 10,000 miles away.
Oh my gosh.
So our parents left them. It wasn't during the age of Facebook and email and social media and texting. It was during the era where, in order to actually talk to them, our parents had to call an operator and say, we need to schedule a phone call. And the slots for scheduling a phone call back to India weren't during like 5 o'clock in the evening or 7 o'clock when everyone's sitting around the dinner table. They were usually 2 o'clock in the morning. So I think Madhu had the same experience. We would, in order to talk to our grandparents, which would probably happen once a year, we would be sleeping, and then there'd be this, wake up, they're on the phone, through the wall, and then we kind of get out of bed and stumble in there. Here, talk to your Raji. Hello? Hello, hi, Raji, I love you. All right, go back to bed. So there were letters that you actually had to write.
You got the B+.
I'm so disappointed in you. Did I send my son over there for you to get a B+?
That's right.
So our kids, we actually have decided we stay in Michigan because we want our kids to be able to have the experience with their grandparents that we never had. And that's been so great for them. They get to actually love to grow up with their grandparents and be sort of separate parents from us. So what that allows them to do is do the thing that kids sort of have a plus-minus relationship with, and that is the alone trip with the grandparents. No parents, just grandkids, grandparents. Going off somewhere else so that they can tell them all the things that their parents are doing wrong. That's the point of a grandparent unfiltered trip with the grandchildren. You don't know Marathi? Why don't you know the language of your forefathers and your ancestors? Well, your kids don't know it either. That is no excuse. You should be online looking at the YouTube and learning this language. So our kids got a chance to actually be with their grandparents in Toronto. And the best part of these sort of unfiltered things is that when they come back, they tell us these great stories. And then our reaction is, yep, I know. That was our life. Like, did you know your dad was a racist? Did you know that your mom gets up at 5 o'clock? And did you know they fight all the time? Yep, that was our life. So after they came back from Toronto, they said, I have to tell you, your dad is a racist. Like, what do you mean a racist? Well, he's not really a racist, but he doesn't really think before he speaks. I'm like, well, what are you talking about? It's like, well, so our three of the four grandchildren were they were in Toronto with both their grandparents, my parents, and they're in a tourist bus. I don't know if you've ever been to Toronto, but you get to do these nice little tours. And they're on one of those buses, and it's an open air bus, and they're going through the city of Toronto, and the traffic is blocked off because of Gay Pride Week. So as they're telling me this story, I'm like, oh shit. So it's blocked off, and they start, my oldest son, and like all three of them are getting into this story. They're like, oh my God. And so then what happened, I'll tell you the way they told the story. And then what happened, it was stopped. And then the tour guide gets up and he's like, yeah, we're in Toronto. We're very prideful of our Gay Pride Week. It's a very important week, and it's very important for the LGBTQ community. And my dad is very curious. Those of you that have met him, he's inquisitive. He's like, Q? What is LGBTQ? I'm like, well, it's lesbians. Tour guide's like, lesbians, bisexuals, gay, transgender, and queers, or questioning. And my dad, without a filter, starts to laugh hysterically on the top of the bus. Like, queer? Questioning? I have some questions. Am I Q? And meanwhile, my 3 children are like, oh my God, I want to jump off this bus. And including my mother, who is fairly versed in the sort of culture of America. She knew exactly that he should not be raising his hand and asking what a Q is. So he's kind of accidentally racist. He doesn't mean to. He's actually, my parents are they're so liberal that you cannot even imagine. They came to this country because they wanted to carve a new way of life. They don't believe, they actually are fairly well off, but they believe they should pay a lot more taxes than they do. They believe so fervently in being able to help the underprivileged. They don't agree with a lot of the policies of the current administration, but they're also sort of unintentionally racist. And I think it's because we all are unintentionally racist. And it doesn't mean that we're bad people. It just means that we're humans, because we need to make sense of this world. And it's really hard to make sense of this world without trying to come up with rules that will help us make sense of the world. So I think the thing that my parents have taught me more than anything is that as immigrants to this country, and as people who are privileged to be in this country, that the greatest part of this country is that it really challenges you to really be better than you've ever been before. It's easy to be in a country that's very homogenous, that is one way, because you're not thrust into situations where you have to ask a question like, what does queer mean? But they love being in a country where they get to ask questions because it challenges them. And I think that may be the way for us to go forward, is to just keep asking questions, very non-judgmentally, but just ask questions because we're really curious about other people. Paul, I really think, espouses that. If there's anyone in our friends who is the most chaotic, most disorganized, most pursuing multiple parallel paths simultaneously with equal vim and vigor, it's Paul. But Paul is by far the most curious person I've ever met. He doesn't make assumptions. All he does is ask questions. And they really come from an incredibly genuine place, because he just wants to know why, or why you think the way you think. Sometimes that makes us uncomfortable, but I think it always makes us better. So, happy birthday, Paul.